This would be the 14 to 35 millimeter because everyone wants to vlog.
It's so wide.
Yeah, I know, it's so wide. Jordan Drake.
Hey.
Yeah. Okay, welcome back everyone. Today we have some very interesting announcements from Canon. This is the first series of APS-C based products for the RF mount that we've seen, and they're actually quite impressive. So we've got the R7, which is a new pro-level APS-C mirrorless camera. We've also got the R10, which is the entry-level super compact APS-C mirrorless camera. And we've got two kit lenses, the RF-S 18 to 45 millimeter f4.5 to 6.3 IS STM, as well as the RF-S 18 to 150 f3.5 to f6.3 IS STM. Okay, so let's start with the cameras. Now, both of these bodies feature Digic X processors. They are paired with brand new sensor designs. In other words, these are not sensors that are brought over from the M line. They're not smaller versions of things that have appeared on other cameras. They are brand new designs, and I have to say they are quite spectacular. The EOS R7 camera features a 32.5 megapixel sensor. It features mechanical shutter burst rates up to 15 frames per second and electronic shutter burst rates up to 30 frames a second. The body does feature in-body image stabilization, and for video, you're able to get 4K up to 60p all oversampled, so no crop. And there is an interesting new design feature. So on the back of the camera, the rear dial has been placed around the joystick, which I really like. You get used to this proximity really quickly, like your hand doesn't have to move. It's all just right there under your thumb. And I noticed that it was actually awkward not having it there when I switched over to the R10. This is a really solid design move on Canon's part. The R7 also features dual UHS-2 card slots, and it uses the same battery that you find in the R5 and R6 cameras. Comes in weighing a mere 612 grams, and the pricing on this is very interesting. This is going to be $14.99 for the body only, or you can pair it up to the 18 to 150 millimeter kit lens that comes in at $18.99. Now, the EOS R10 is the more entry level of the two bodies. It does feature a 24.2 megapixel sensor. You can do burst rate shooting with mechanical shutter up to 15 frames per second, and electronic goes up to 23 frames per second. So not quite the performance you're going to get out of the R7, but still pretty impressive. If you're shooting video, you can push this camera up to 4K at 30p oversampled from the 6K full width readout. It doesn't have in-body image stabilization, but it does have digital IS. The EOS R10 is an extremely compact camera, and thus it has a smaller battery, the LP17. I'll talk about battery life in a second. Most impressively, it comes in weighing a mere 426 grams. Now, this is priced three different ways. You can get the body only, or the body with the kit lens that is an 18 to 45 millimeter, or the 18 to 150 millimeters. So the pricing is going to be $979 for body only, $1099 for the 18 to 45 millimeter kit option, and $1370 for the longer zoom range option. So this week, Canon were gracious enough to invite me to come to Florida and try out these new bodies and lenses, and I was really impressed. The new sensors perform extremely well, from what I can tell from the JPEG images at least. I shot most of these samples with the new kit lenses. Now, Canon did, of course, have a bunch of pro-level lenses there, but I opted to shoot with these with what comes in the kit version. I wanted to have the same experience as somebody who's maybe starting out with these cameras. There were a few exceptions, though. I did use the RF 35mm and 50mm f1.8 compact primes, and also I did some video testing with the RF 14 to 35mm f4 zoom lens. Now, one thing I was particularly impressed with both of these bodies is the autofocus. It's the same autofocus system and the same performance in both bodies, and it's based on what we have in the Canon R3. Now, there's some new features with the autofocus that some shooters might not be as familiar with in terms of tracking. So the way it worked before, up until the R5, is you have a focus point, and you use that to engage the servo focus, and that begins the auto tracking. It's a little bit different on these cameras because it just finds the subject based on what you have selected in the algorithm and starts tracking accordingly, and it's really good. In fact, this kind of puts the autofocus performance back up on par with what Sony is doing, in the sense that the camera is 3D aware. So if you have it set for animal, let's say, and we were shooting birds, and you start shooting birds, and it was impressive because sometimes the head of the bird's looking the other way, but it still locks on and finds the bird in in the scene. It's really pretty impressive, and it's also extremely fast. Now, I do want to note that even though these are brand new sensor designs, neither one of them are stacked CMOS sensors. So you're not going to have the same extreme response and performance that you're going to get out of something like the EOS R3. That's also a much more expensive camera. It's also full frame. These are smaller sensors, so they take advantage of the faster readout inherently. They are not stacked, but you do get really good performance out of these, and I noticed that my keeper ratio was really high. I didn't have a whole lot of out-of-focus shots in these, so it keeps up really well. You're certainly going to be very happy with the results that you're going to get with the mechanical shutter burst rate speeds of 15 frames per second. Now, if you're using the higher speed electronic shutter burst rate speeds, well, the other issue that you're going to have is rolling shutter. Now, in terms of the other cameras and the other choices that you have out there, it is better controlled than what Sony have on their cameras, but it is still a little bit of an issue. So if you're shooting fast-moving subjects or sports, you're probably going to still want to upgrade to something like the R3 that has a stack sensor and can handle that much better. But for more general purpose shooting, you're going to be very happy with the performance of both of these sensors. So as I mentioned this earlier, all of the images that you're seeing in this video are in-camera JPEGs. And since I shot these before the release of either camera, Lightroom and Capture One won't read RAW files yet, so I had to stick with JPEG. I am really interested in RAW performance since these are two new sensors, but that'll have to wait for the full review. I left all of the images unedited so that you can see the files as they are straight off of camera. However, if you want to see how far we can actually push even JPEG images, well, they do fairly well. I can get a great film look when I use the presets from my latest preset series for Adobe Lightroom and Capture One. So if you haven't seen what I've been working on, these presets are part of a project that I've been working on for like the last 2 years to emulate the contrast and the color characteristics of classic film stocks. So the idea is to get the look of film, but with all the benefits of digital, such as resolution, dynamic range, being able to rescue shadow or highlight details, so on and so forth. Fujified is a series of 16 preset looks based on various Fujifilm stocks, so things like Eterna, Provia, Velvia, and there's others. And it's a really cool way to quote-unquote Fujify your images with film stock looks from any camera. Kodakified is also a series of 16 preset looks, including several different Kodachrome stocks, as well as more modern films such as Kodak Ektar, Elite Chrome, Porta 160, and I got a bunch of others in there as well. So if you'd like to get these for yourself, well, this is a good time because I've got an introductory sale going on right now, and all preset packs are 40% off. So if you go over to the artofphotography.tv/presets, or you can use the link below this video, and you can see what these can do for your own images. So let's talk about video performance. Now, I think that both of these bodies are actually solid video performers. The biggest difference that you're going to note here is that the R10 is an 8-bit camera, whereas the R7 is capable of 10-bit footage. So this opens up a whole world of things like using C-Log3 or even HDR output. This is not to say that the R10 isn't decent for video, but since it's only 8-bit, you don't have access to the C-Log3. This leaves you with the in-body camera profiles. The only problem that I have with these is they were all designed for stills, so the best thing to do is actually take one, modify it, bring the sharpness down a little bit, and tune it into what is going to work. So 10-bit video is going to be the advantage in the R7 for a couple $100 more, but more importantly, rather than looking at it versus the R10, looking at this versus the competition, Sony and Nikon are both at 8-bit on their APS-C cameras still. The only real competitor is going to be Fujifilm, who have 10-bit video in a lot of their models, but the autofocus is way better in what I'm seeing on these Canon cameras versus what I've even seen out of Fujifilm. Image stabilization is also a differentiator between the R7 and the R10. So in the R7, you're going to have in-body image stabilization, and then the R10, it's digital only. You're going to notice this most, and I know that a lot of you are probably going to want to use a camera like this for using it for social media or as a vlogging option, and this is where things get difficult. Now, most of you that do this know that there's a big difference in being able to just handhold and shoot something that's in front of you where you have more support on the camera versus having to turn it around and shoot yourself. And the solution for most cameras is you're going to have to go with a gimbal. Now, I'll show you what both of these look like. I did some vlog testing while I was in Florida, so this is for the vloggers out there who are curious.
I'm saying nice things about him. Conveniently,
he likes my vlogs.
The GoPro vlogs are amazing.
We just had a discussion about not liking vlogging, and then I just turned on the camera.
Yeah, and it's terrible.
So,
now I feel like everyone's watching me.
Yeah, because we're a bunch of jerk faces up here.
A bunch of nerds.
Talking into a camera.
Yeah, that's pretty good.
You look good. Hey, look, let's use the joystick. Oh, there, it just went on to you.
Yeah, I don't have that show up on my R3.
Really?
No, I need to figure out why.
And I'm still trying to figure out how Fro is in every photograph at every video I've made today. Fro, what's your favorite lens? Which one?
This one.
So some of you may be wondering what the image quality looks like for a vlogging application on these APS-C cameras. Well, we are on the R7 right now. So this is a 10-bit camera. So I have the option of shooting in C-Log 3. So this is the upper tier option. Let's move over to the R10 right now, which is going to be 8-bit. So we only get stock picture profile off the camera, but let's see what that looks like. Now, with both of these cameras, the thing is I'm vlogging with the kit lens. I'm using the external mic. The kit lens is really good, but even at 18, my head is filling an unusual amount of the screen. So what I would recommend is actually the 14 to 35 f4. Let's try that out. This would be the 14 to 35 millimeter because everyone wants to vlog.
It's so wide.
Yeah, I know, it's so wide. Jordan Drake.
Hey.
Yeah. Hey. And finally, this is the R7 with the 14 to 35 millimeter f4. This is the one to go with. It gives you the proper angle if you're going to be shooting yourself. And remember, we're in pretty bad lighting. It's fluorescent indoor sports lighting, so this is what it is. But this is a typical scenario where some of you might be vlogging in. And I think using C-Log 3 gives you a lot of flexibility in this, but more importantly, at the price point the R7 comes at, I think having 10-bit C-Log video is pretty impressive.
So if you're serious about using one of these bodies for video, I would highly recommend the R7. It's going to give you better IBIS. Of course, you also get 10-bit video files. My only gripe from these tests that you probably noticed is the way that digital stabilization works. And so you're going to see this also in things like the R5. And while it helps for handheld footage, it still has some of that warped background effect that we've seen. Now, the R5 is a full-frame camera. This is a much smaller sensor, so it's not as bad, but it is still noticeable and worth noting. Now, in terms of connections, both cameras do give you USB-C power delivery. They have HDMI video ports and mic inputs. The biggest difference here, though, is that the R7 gives you a headphone jack for monitoring audio. So a few observations and some general first impressions after using both of these bodies. So the first thing I want to address is something that's a little bit of an elephant in the room, which is the EOS M mount. So you've probably seen a lot of the speculation and even the rumors that this is the end of the line for EOS M, which Canon were very clear with us at this event that that is not the case. These are still big selling cameras for them, and they have no plans at all for discontinuing EOS M. However, Canon has also publicly stated more than once that all of their efforts and design are going into RF mount at this point. So the same goes not only for EOS M, but also for the EF mount DSLR cameras. So while they'll still be available, and you could always buy one of those bodies and it'll be fully supported, if you're waiting for new lenses and stuff, you're going to have to probably look at third parties for support there, because I don't think you're going to see anything new from Canon. That being said, I also think it's worth putting a little bit extra money in and going with these RF bodies. These are out-speccing and outperforming a lot of the competition. I really was impressed with these, and I want to say a couple things about APS-C, particularly for video, but also for stills. There's a couple reasons why I think APS-C is still important, and it's really cool to see companies, and others have done it too, Nikon and Sony, where this whole idea of one mount. So you use the same mount for your APS-C cameras that you're going to use for your full frame. So if you have a high-resolution full frame, you can always mount an APS-C lens to it, and it will auto crop it out in camera, and I've tried this with my R5. It works just fine. And you can use your full frame lenses, albeit them big and heavy, on your APS-C size sensor, and you've got a 1.6 crop factor in Canon's case, so it's going to be cropping in and using the best part of the lens anyway, so you've got some great imaging options. But there's two other arguments that I would make, and it's the same that I hold true with Micro Four Thirds as well, in particular using these for video. If you're filming something that's up close and you're using really close focus distances, it's nice having a smaller sensor, which is going to inherently give you a greater depth of field, still letting the same amount of light in. That's one thing that I like a lot, especially when I film B-roll for these videos. Shooting on full frame sometimes, it just gives you a really shallow depth of field, so it's nice to have a smaller sensor for that. The other argument is using that crop factor to your advantage when you need to shoot at longer telephoto distances. So if you're using a 100mm lens, all of a sudden with a 1.6 crop factor, it would be become a 160mm lens. So the longer the lens, the closer you're actually going to be able to get. So there's a little bit of flexibility there too. Now the issue is that in most camera manufacturers' cases, and I would say the exception is Fujifilm because they've been very dedicated to APS-C for a long time, everything else seems to be an afterthought and an entry-level thing that is supposed to somehow lead you into the full-frame system. I love the fact that Canon have really beefed up the specs on these, and they've given us, I would say, close to pro-level performance in an APS-C size body. I wouldn't call it complete professional performance. I still think that if you were really serious, you would probably want something like the Fujifilm X-T3, X-T4, but the R7 actually competes with those cameras with, from my experience, better autofocus performance. So there's clearly some more things that I want to test out on these camera bodies. I only had these for one day. Canon did not let us hang on to them. They did say they would have some units for review in the near future. So as soon as I'm able to get one in, I would love to do a deeper review. I want to go into things like low light performance, and I really want to be able to look at the RAW files in particular because these are new sensors that we're dealing with. Just the JPEGs though, and being able to look at those and analyze them, I've been really impressed with both of these bodies. So if you have any questions of things maybe you'd like to see in the full review, drop them in the comments below. Until the next video, I'll catch you guys then. Later.